So you've been curious about something, right? But you've never actually gone down that rabbit hole or scratched that itch. Now, my name is Marcus. This is Discover Ignite, where we discover possibilities and ignite change. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing. Now, curiosity, rabbit hole, scratching that itch, right? Where can curiosity take you? Now, we all know as kids, right? We were extremely curious, but when you become older, you kind of lose that sense of curiosity. And, there's just more other things that take priority. At least they seem so in your mind, right? And we tend to forget, right? Like there are things that we want to be curious about and research more, and we'll say we'll get to it, and then we push it off, and then we never get to it, right? But I want you to actually be able to be curious, right? You should actually explore some kind of creative thing every week. I think it's extremely important for everybody to explore their curiosity, right? And make time for those things that you're actually curious about. Now, why would I even mention this, right? The biggest thing is I've always been curious, and like everybody else, we've always been curious, things you've been intrigued about, but you don't, again, do any kind of research or really look into it, right? Because you're just so busy, right? Life just takes you one direction, and by the time life is done with you, you're tired and you don't want to go seek out those things that you're curious about, right? Because they don't take priority. But if you can take those things and make it a priority, it can lead to some really life-changing things. And one thing in particular, which this isn't about veganism or anything like that, but veganism is one thing that has really changed my perspective on exploring curiosity, right? And this is why, right? Because I grew up in a family that was, hunters and fishermen, and I just grew up in that lifestyle, right? Like there was nobody I even know of that was vegan, right? And then to be curious about it, right? Because all you hear is the headlines in the news, and you see a lot of negative content based around veganism, right? And so that's what I always associated it with, and that was just coming naturally, right? That's the way I was born and raised. And going into transitioning into veganism was hard, but I was curious about it, right? Because I was trying to get healthy, and so I explored it, even though it was something that was like completely against some of my beliefs, only because I didn't have a real defined definition of what it was, right? I was just kind of going off of what I had heard growing up. And so that's just the biggest thing, is I explored it, right? I was curious about it, I explored it, I debated it for many weeks, if not a month or maybe even 2 months. I debated it, right? Because to me, it didn't make sense, right? But I didn't know nothing about it. But I was still curious about it, right? I've heard all these good things about what it does for your health and how it can make you feel energized and stuff like that. And at my age, feeling energized and feeling young again would be perfect, right? Especially in the shape that I was in at that time. And so I was curious, and I followed up, right? And I dove more into it whenever I had free time. I wouldn't, sit and do other things that I felt like I was too exhausted, right? Because normally when you come home, if you're working or you're doing something or you're running a business or whatever, even if you have time running a business, but nonetheless, you come home and you're tired, right? And you don't want to do anything else but just go to bed or do something mindless, right? But I explored it. I spent all my free time exploring it because I knew I had to make a change, right? I was right on the cusp of having to take, medication. So that it forced me to have to change my diet, but I was curious about this, right? So I explored veganism, right? And I started testing, right? Because I was like feeling the waters, and I slowly transitioned in, right? And then come to find out, all those things I was reading about and researching were actually true, right? Like my energy level went up, and I felt younger again, right? I didn't have any more pain, right? I associated the old age came with, pain and fogginess and all these other different things, right? We associate these things with specific ages and stuff. And so it's just my curiosity, right, leading me down this way, even though there was a lot of things going against me, right? But I was still curious about it. And so after finding that out, right, after realizing that, I started looking at other things in life, right? And I came across this guy His name is MJ DeMarco. He's an author. He's a self-made millionaire, right? And his book can be a little out there for some people, right? He's this entrepreneur who exploded during the .com era, and he had this concept, right, about exploring those things that you want to know, right? Like if there's something specific, like if you want to write a book about something, or if you want to get in a particular business, or if you want to involve something in your life, like you should know about it, right? You shouldn't just hire somebody to do it without having some kind of base knowledge on stuff, right? You should at least know a lot of the basic components of whatever you're doing. So a good example would be like finance, right? And because finance is one of those things that I think we're all kind of curious about, but we don't actually do anything about it, right? We have like a 401k. We're told to put money away in a 401k, and we do that, but we have no idea what exactly goes on behind closed doors, right? We just know we get charged fees, and that if the stocks go up, they go down, if the market's bad. We don't know a bunch of different things. And this is where this concept comes in about being curious, right? You should actually get some kind of base knowledge of finance and seeing what else that it leads to, right? Like it led me to becoming a day trader, right? So it's just being curious about things and seeing where that rabbit hole goes. That's ultimately what this is about, right? Is finding something that you're curious about, right? Like when I was looking into finances and trying to essentially monitor my own 401k, right? That's what I wanted to do. And because I was curious about it, right? Like you hear about all these fees and everything, but I didn't know. I didn't have any kind of baseline. So I started building a baseline, and then I ultimately became a day trader as well. And so, but that wouldn't have started if I wasn't curious, right? Now, it's always good to have the curiosity and understand that and start executing and researching, right? And then when you get to that far, it leads you a different way. Once you start getting a baseline, you start seeing all these other different options that you've never seen before. And it goes back to like the vegan diet, right? Like there's all these other different diets. I've tried many other different diets, and none of them are the greatest, right? You're always giving up something, right? And you're always miserable. But I found a diet that worked, and it worked really well for me, right? And then I went into finance, and I was trying to figure out a way that I can do investing. And a lot of investments, they don't offer a lot of percentage back, right? There's no ROI. The ROIs are pretty bad, right? And so I wanted to find a way to make that better, right? And it was just being curious. And I think that's what's really important, is to be curious about stuff and actually execute on it, right? And you can only imagine what you can find, right? And this all essentially pertains to the whole veganism thing, right? And looking at that and seeing what benefits it could offer me, right? As opposed to looking at it, I had to get over that whole hurdle of this bad notation of it being this activist and all these other different things. Yes, there's a lot to veganism, right? It's not just a diet, it's a lifestyle, and it's about morals and all these other things and ethics, but there's a lot more to it, right? And so without going down the rabbit hole, you would never see these things, right? You only take the headline news and that's what it is, right? And you already come up with this opinion as to actually exploring it out. And this is why curiosity is so important and can open so many different doors for you. Because if you're curious and you actually research stuff, the possibilities are limitless, right? And now it's like for myself, right? I've learned so much, being vegan, being a day trader, I've learned a lot, right? Like there's a whole other different world, two other different worlds I knew nothing about. And then to see all the other different things, all the different, aspects behind everything and why things work the way they work, your mind changes, right? Your perspective changes a lot on the way everything works, right? Everything as a whole works. And this is why curiosity and exploring that rabbit hole, where it can lead you, right? And this is extremely important, because just blowing it off and just taking everything for face value, right? And it just doesn't get you anywhere. Where if you follow your curiosity, you pull on that string, and then it unravels like so many different things, opens up completely different worlds and realms that have never seen before. And it's funny because you don't really notice this stuff, right? All this stuff is underneath your nose. This is why perspective really matters, right? Because you just don't have the perspective. If you change the perspective, your world changes. It essentially pivots, right? And you can do all this by being curious and exploring those things that really interest you, right? Now, I myself, every time I'm curious about something, I'll explore it, I'll research it and say, hey, that sounds familiar, I might as well go look into it, right? I mean, what's gonna take? You take, an hour. Typically, most people sit and watch TV for an hour. You can spend an hour just researching that thing you're curious about, right? And get some knowledge. And the next thing you know, like I was doing, was I wasn't just spending an hour, right? And I was spending a lot more time, researching and trying to understand, oh, what's this? Well, what's that? It just leads to different things, right? This rabbit hole can go really, really deep, and you can find some really interesting things. And some of them you can adapt to, to your lifestyle. Some of you don't have to adapt, but at least you have that baseline, right? And that's ultimately what this is about, is finding a baseline, allowing your curiosity to give you a baseline to open up, new worlds, right? Because a lot of people, I think, get this narrow vision, right? Especially if you've lived a life that was extremely, perhaps controlled or something. You're limited to only what's being brought towards you, what you're knowledgeable about, right? And being curious, it opens other doors, right? And being curious is like that key that can open doors to other things. And this is ultimately what it's about, is exploring, right? And being curious. And I've really thoroughly enjoyed this, right? Now, when I was younger, I did do a little bit of curious things, and I did explore a little bit and gone down different rabbit holes and learned about different things, right? This is where experiences come into play, is if you experience different things, it opens up other worlds as well, right? Is being curious, going for the experiences, going for the research, and just doing all these different things is feeding that curiosity, because it can lead you to a whole other world, as opposed to just assuming this is the way everything's got to work. And get out of that mindset, right? Because if you can get out of that mindset, you feel like life isn't as bad as some people make it out to be, right? Like, it can be bad. Yes, there can be catastrophic events and stuff like that. But nonetheless, I mean, you can make a world where you're happy, right? Because you explore these things, you can find excitement, you can find, all these different adventures and everything like that by feeding your curiosity and getting out there and doing different things, experiencing different things, and becoming knowledgeable. Have a baseline of those things you're curious about, right? That you want to get into, right? And then once you get into it and explore it, then it just opens up a completely different world for yourself. It changes your mindset, it changes your perspective, it changes your life. So if you enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button on the way out. And until next time, I will see you guys later.